Welcome everybody to what is the second video in our short series of three, I guess, kind of workshops thinking about returning back to school. So my name is Matt Yates and I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm here with my colleague.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Christiansen. I'm a family therapist.
So back to school, this has been a real big topic in recent weeks, and like I said, this is our second video talking about it. In our first video we were talking, I guess, directly to schools and to school staff about our thoughts and feelings from a more psychological therapeutic point of view. And similarly, I guess, from that point of view, we are talking today in this video, I guess, a bit more to parents and carers, and just thinking about actually how to have those conversations with your children about going back to school. Obviously, it's can be for all sorts of different thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So I'd like to share this with you today. So, of course, COVID-19 and lockdown has been really, really difficult. It's impossible to have not been impacted by it. And I think something that I've really come to be aware of in sort of recent weeks is an awful lot of those people which you sort of thought were, doing really, really well and kind of basically giving off a sense that actually they're really coping really well, actually it's actually kind of impacted those people significantly as well. I guess it's really important to say that this return to school, it's not normal. It's not the same as going back after a couple of weeks holiday or coming back after the summer holidays. It's a really, really different feeling. And just to really kind of emphasize that if you are feeling peculiar and maybe feeling worried or concerned or confused, that's really expected. This is not a normal situation, and that's how we feel when we're faced with a difficult situation. And I guess really kind of already touched on this, but we, as much as lockdown and COVID-19 has still and continues to be a distressing event, in part we've probably got a little bit used to kind of lockdown, and we've got a little bit used to kind of actually accepting that we're going to be at home more and the things we're not able to do. So now it must feel such a shock really to kind of go from that point of view where we're in lockdown and we daren't kind of go out and do things and interact with people, and suddenly the idea of actually going back to school, that might feel a bit of a shock. And of course, with that kind of shock, a big part of it would be the sense that, fears about COVID-19, fears about returning to school, the possibility of an increase in infection rate, things about risk to your own family. So just really just to validate that, if you're sitting there at home watching, feeling pretty nervous about schools returning, you are not alone. There'll be lots of people feeling this way, and it's very understandable if you feel this way.
And I think it's important just to remember that just because if we compare, and we always do compare ourselves with others, and we look at them and saying, what they look like, they're doing fine. But actually we can't know what's going on inside of people just from seeing the outside. So really everybody's been affected, and we have different ways of showing it really.
Yeah. Okay. So if you've seen any of Suas psychology videos before, you might well be familiar with this slide. So this is taken from Beacon House, which is a fantastic service which has has a brilliant website with really good resources on it. And time again, I use this a lot in my both personal and professional life in terms of thinking about how do we respond to people, and particularly in this video, how do we respond to children. And what this really illustrates is we've got to work in the order in which brains grow and develop. So we've got to work with the children from the bottom up. And that's why we sort of work in this order. So primarily in this video, what we're talking about is for you to be able to have your conversations with your child about returning to school, for that to kind of be heard and understood, you kind of are going to need to be at the top of this upside down triangle, so at the reason bit. But the only way we can get to that reason part of our brain, the only way we can get to that part of our brain which should be able to sort of reflect, understand and think and problem solve, is if we do the bottom two layers first. So it's got to be in this order. It's got to be regulate first, then move up to relate. So this is primarily what we're talking about in this video here today. So really think about just focusing your attention on these two bottom layers, and then the hope is that top layer will be much more easily accessible. Okay, I think I'll hand you over to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, and it's easier said than done, obviously, to help the children regulate when they're feeling really dysregulated, and also because we as parents and carers are also humans, and we will also sometimes dysregulate ourselves. So help our child regulate if we are feeling dysregulated ourselves is not always an easy one. So I think that needs to be said really. There's lots of different kind of ways we can do it. I don't know whether you want to put that on. Matt. Yeah. So there's lots of different ways we can help our children regulate, and some of them are quite self-explanatory. So I'm not going to go through all of those. That's for instance the chair push-up that some of you might be aware of, where you sit on a seat and you have your hands next to you on the seat, and you lift your whole weight up, and you hold yourself up by the hands until you get tired. Or there's a wall push-up where it's a bit like a push-up, but just doing it on a wall, really. And as you will see, I don't know whether you want to put the rest of Matt, on all these ones, they're very much about doing something quite physical. It's not a focus on cognitively doing something as much as it is about physical and feeling your body. Because when we are dysregulating, it can be really hard using our thoughts and our mind in a really balanced and sensible way, because we sometimes need to go in and regulate our physical part of our body first before we're able to access the more cognitive part. Yeah, so I think that's it, really.
Yeah, and I guess if you watch some of the other videos that are reducing SOAS, some of these might be quite familiar to you, and we've talked about them before, and that's basically just because we love them, and these are things which, generally speaking, tend to be quite physically regulating, and also kind of tapping more to sensory stuff there. So you've got things like eating something chewy, drinking through a straw. These are just ways of using the body which, broadly speaking, tend to be quite regulating for all of us. Of course, everyone's a unique and individual, and you'll probably know what things are best for your child, but just here's a selection of things to give a go.
And I think it's also sensible just to build them in during your everyday, really, not just to wait till your child is already dysregulated, but really to make sure that they've had them as little breaks so they can catch it before things get too much, really. So really to try or even, your child best, to start to recognize, oh, this is one of the signs that they're starting to get a bit dysregulated. So catch it before it goes completely, your child goes very, very dysregulated, and maybe it doesn't become so difficult if you're able to quickly go in and help them with doing some of these kind of regulating exercises.
And so Dr. Bruce Perry, he had this lovely phrase of brainstem calmers, and this quote here. So what do you think about this, Charlotte?
Yeah, it's patterned, repetitive, and rhythmic. That's probably things that many of us would associate when our children are smaller, the kind of things of helping them calm down by patting them or rocking them or doing something that is very rhythmic, and something that is very calming because it's very, I guess, very predictable and very rhythmic. So it's really just being mindful that actually, even though our kids are much older now, maybe these kind of things is something is very, very naturally calming for humans, probably for ourselves as well. That those kind of rocking kind of or pattern, it is something that is just generally calms down any age, really.
Yeah. Okay, so we've initially been thinking about the bottom of upside down period that regulates, and now moving up to the middle to the relate bit. So I'm fully aware, Charlotte, with the slide I'm about to show now, there might be a number of parents, particularly those in adoption, which might be rolling their eyes when they see this. But as always, we're talking about PACE. So for those who are less familiar with PACE, PACE is a useful way to remember some general concepts to keep in mind. And this was brought together by Dan Hughes, who is, I guess, one of the key people that created direct developmental psychotherapy, or DDP for short. And I guess in a real nutshell, PACE is what can help our brains to feel safe. And what we have here is playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So it creates the word PACE, to easy to remember. So with playfulness, what we mean there is not necessarily playing, although it could be. It's just generally a lightness of tone, be able to actually be playful in your interactions and your tone of voice. Playfulness gives brains a real sense of safety, so it can be really helpful just to help calm brains. Next is acceptance. So we'll talk more about acceptance in a moment, but what we're saying really here is we're not saying that we're accepting necessarily bad behavior, but what we're accepting is the urges, wishes, thoughts that perhaps are underneath the behavior that a child might accept. We were just accepting that for them, they are seeing a situation in a certain way. Curiosity. So curiosity can be really helpful in terms of just keeping that curious tone of voice to really help kind of open up conversations, maybe to help you kind of get some insight into what your child's experiencing. It might be maybe you have a guess as to what you think they might be feeling, and then they can very happily tell you that you're wrong. But the key message here is it doesn't matter if you give guesses and get them wrong. Just in the demonstrating that you're attempting to kind of tap into your child's world can be really helpful. And then lastly, empathy. So what we really mean by empathy here is, we'll talk about it a bit more in a moment, but stepping into someone else's shoes. So actually imagining from a child's perspective what it might be like. So even if we think actually what they perceive is a bit silly, just having a go at actually imagining what it'd be like if you were that child with that mind, with that view of what was going on, what would that feel like? And that can be really helpful in terms of you conveying that empathy to your child, but just helpful for you to understand what it might be like for them. So keep these concepts in mind. These are really the bedrock of that relate layer, the middle of the upside down triangle. It's not to say you have to do them in this order. You can maybe just use like one or two in the moment, and at times some of them will just not feel appropriate. So if your child is really feeling very, very sad, maybe in that moment it's not helpful to be playful. If maybe your child was really, really just struggling they're only just about feeling regulated, but really struggling to have any connection with you, perhaps just focus more on the acceptance and the empathy. But generally speaking, these are good sort of go-to things to have a go and play with, which can be really valuable in terms of helping that connection, that relationship with your child. So we'll talk about acceptance a bit more. So very kindly, an adopted parent that Sue has worked with in the past, are happy for us to share this quote from them. So acceptance that my child's experiences are completely different from my own and will influence his response to incidents in a way I might struggle to understand. When I accept that his feelings about a situation are valid, however illogical and unreasonable they might seem to me, this reduces the likelihood of conflict. And for me, this really captures how it can be so powerful in helping your child's brain to feel listened to feel safe. And I really feel this captures it. More about acceptance. So just to be really clear, we're not saying that unwanted behaviour is okay. We're not saying it's okay for your child to hit their sibling or to break something in the room. What we're saying is that we're instead accepting the thoughts, the wishes, desires, urges, emotions expressed or driving the behaviour. So what's perhaps underneath the behaviour, that's what we're showing acceptance for. And it's really, really hard. It's really, really hard to really sort of imbue and show acceptance. It's particularly hard when you don't agree. So your child might have a particular emotion about a situation or thought about a situation, and you don't agree. What's really important to say is by showing acceptance, you're not saying that you're agreeing, you're just accepting that for the child, that's how they experience it. It's particularly hard when you know they're incorrect, so perhaps they've really misunderstood the situation, but still just have a go at tapping into, for that child, that's how they're perceiving it. And it's really hard when, to you as a parent, you think, oh, for goodness sake, it's just this small minor issue, it's not a big deal. That's going to be less helpful to you. If you can really just have a go accepting that for that child, it's a big deal and that's what they're communicating, that's going to really be helpful to you.
And I think it's also important to know that just because we're not accepting something doesn't mean that it's going to go away for your child. So just because, if we're saying, no, that's not right, then they're going to stop feeling or thinking or wishing that, it will still be there. They just stop sharing it with us. And that's not what we want. We want them to feel they can share whatever is in their mind and in their heart. And then we can talk about it and we can work it out together instead of just thinking, oh, I can't share that because they don't like me saying things like that. So yeah, just thought that was important too.
Thank you, Charlotte. Speaking about empathy, so I think I said this already, but really what captures for me is stepping into your child's shoes, having a go at seeing through their eyes what they're experiencing. It's really important to say it's not sympathy. So sympathy can be kind of felt like, oh yeah, it's really hard for you. Yeah, that's a shame. Whereas empathy is actually kind of really imagining what that feeling is like and conveying that to that child. So you're really showing that you're trying to be with them and understanding their experience. And this is really nicely captured by a concept in cybersecurity training called being with, which we'll touch on shortly. So Charlotte, we're going to have a go in this second education video of demonstrating some PACE conversations. So I believe, Charlotte, you're going to be the child and I will be the adult.
Yes, I will.
So for those watching, we've had a go at it, sort of thinking what might be some of the things that your children might say about the concept of returning to school. We're fully aware that we can't cover everything, but we've had a go at thinking what sort of things might come up, and just some very brief demonstrations of how our ideas of how you might apply PACE. So we're fully aware this isn't going to get to great solutions or problem solving, but it's just sort of demonstrating a PACE response.
Yeah. We don't learn anything anyway. Why do we have to go back?
Oh, you feel like you've been able to learn just fine at home. Do you know what? I sometimes worry when I don't know what's going to happen. It's really hard. Like, I wonder, are you thinking about going back and not knowing what it would be like?
I hate school. I'm not going back.
Oh, you hate the thought of going back. It must be so hard to think about returning to something that you hate. What's that thought like? Sometimes I really hate something. It's because actually I'm worried about it. Like, do you ever feel like that? What's it like for you?
Don't want to go back to school. I might get sick.
Oh, COVID's been really frightening, hasn't it? We've been told that we need to stay at home, but now they want to go back to school. Does it feel confusing? What do you think it might be like at school?
I bet you if Thomas breaks the rules, I'll be blamed.
Ah, it's not fair when you get in trouble and it's Thomas's fault. I bet you hate it when that happens. Do you know what? I've forgotten what it's like at school. You know, what's it like when that happens? So just before we move on, so apologies for our poor acting, first of all. And then second of all, I guess hopefully what you can kind of capture in some of these is there's probably not really much attempt at playfulness because it's just a brief example, but in most of them we've kind of been touching on accepting the feeling that the child's communicating, having a empathy, what that feels like, and sometimes there's a little sort of slightly curious question to sort of help possibly open up the conversation or at least show that child that we're trying to imagine what it's like for them. So we've got some more for you here. Off you go, Charlotte.
I don't want to go back. I might not be in school the same day as my friends.
Oh gosh, you love seeing your friends. Like, have you been looking forward to seeing them? It must be so hard to think that you might not be in the same day as them. No wonder you don't want to go back.
What if the other kids aren't safe and don't follow the rules?
Oh, it can be really scary when people do things that don't feel safe. What are you worried might happen?
I haven't seen Rian for months. What if she doesn't like me anymore?
Rian's one of your best friends, isn't she? Wow, it'd be so hard if you guys weren't friends anymore. It sounds like you might be sad if that happened. Would you feel angry as well?
I can't tell Miss if I'm worried. She's always so busy.
God, it must be so hard if you want to teach them to know that you're worried, but she's too busy and doesn't notice. I bet you feel safer if she just knew. Do you worry that she doesn't know when you're upset? Okay, so just a little taste there again of some more paceful ways of responding. So I'm aware that at the top of this slide it says acceptance and empathy, but yeah, there is also a bit of curiosity in some of those responses as well. Okay, Charlotte, moving on.
Yeah, so many parents and carers will feel really worried about if we stay with the difficult thing that they're presenting us with, we'll be like opening a can of worms. It will be like making them even more upset or even more worried if we don't try to point out the positive side of it, really. So again, from Circle of Security, or I don't know whether we commented on them before actually, but Circle of Security is an attachment informed parenting model that have a lot of good ideas that we use a lot in our way of thinking. So what they're suggesting is that we need to try and stay with the difficult things that the children are presenting us with. Do you want to put the arrows up?
Yeah, because often I guess this first slide really illustrating a bit like what it's like when you don't go with that emotion. So parents in from a very well-meaning place are trying to prevent that difficult feeling for their child, but this is often a bit sort of what happens. So this blue arrow here is kind of the child perhaps going down with a difficult feeling, let's say maybe anxiety, and then the red arrow is going to be the parent trying to sort of stop that feeling and end it quickly.
Yeah, so it might be a child is telling us something about, oh, I really don't want to go back to school. I feel sick and I don't like it and it's horrible and they think I'm stupid, and they might have lots of different reasons why they don't think so. And as a parent, our gut feeling might be, no, you'll be fine. And of course they don't think you're stupid. You're a lovely boy. And why would they think that? And it's going to be okay. And we go against that experience. So the arrows go almost against how the child is experiencing things. And that makes it really hard for the child, feeling like, no, you don't get it. I really don't feel like how you're saying I'm feeling. That's that kind of mismatch between it. You might have tried yourself, really, as an adult. If you're saying something about something you're worried or upset about, and people with all the best intentions in the world are trying to point out the positive, and you are left with a feeling of, no, you don't really get it. You don't get what I'm experiencing. And that's the same that our children sometimes experience when we, without all the best intentions in the world, are trying to reassure them and make things positive and good and cheer them up. But actually, they're not there. They're not ready for that yet. They need to be understood that we get how difficult they're finding it before they're ready to maybe try and see the positive side of it. So when we try constantly to make things better, they just stay in that feeling of it being difficult for longer. That's the end result of that often.
So from that very well-meaning effort to try and perhaps take a child out of a difficult feeling, actually often by not just going with it and letting it be there, actually a child can kind of often be left down at the bottom there, just sort of stuck in that difficult feeling and not really sure what to do with it. So what are we suggesting instead?
We are suggesting something that probably goes against every bone in your body of what feels right, which is stay with the difficulty for a little bit. It doesn't mean you should stay there forever, but just stay there till your child feels that you get me. All right, okay, you understand how difficult this is for me. So it doesn't mean you should agree. So if your child is saying, everybody thinks I'm stupid and I don't have any friends, it doesn't mean you should say, no, that's right, you're stupid and you don't have any friends. Of course not. It's more about their experience. So it's more about, no wonder you're scared of going in if you don't think there's anyone to play with. I get that. So it's that kind of experience that we're staying with, and we make it very clear to our child that we understand that's really hard. And once our child get the feeling that they're understood, it's easier for them then to be open to ideas of what we can try or how they can feel about it and what other ways of looking upon it there is.
And what we often find is that rather than opening a can of worms by kind of allowing a child to express a difficult feeling, if we actually go with them, we actually find them much more likely to start to come out of it often a bit quicker than if we try to sort of deny it in the previous slide where the child's sort of blue line stay down the bottom. And yeah, self-security often sort of describe this as the being with. So just being with that difficult feelings has an awful lot of power. So this brings us to our final slide. So our sort of final top tip, Charlotte.
Yeah. So our final top tip is really that model we showed earlier on about that our children and adults as well, actually, it's really difficult to start reasoning unless we feel safe enough and we feel we're connected. So really the first step is make sure we are regulated, and that we can do that with the different kind of exercises we showed earlier, or you might have some special ones that works for you and your family. Really often something that's a bit physical, something that calms our body before our mind can start working in a more logical kind of way. And then relate, that's about feeling close, experiencing empathy from each other and feeling connected, really. And then, not before then, we can start going in and saying, what else can we do? How else can we find a solution to this? What can we do for different this time? Let's say about going back to school and your child might not have had a great experience being in school before. If we steam in with, oh, but it'd be different now, it's a fresh start, it's all going to be fine, they're not going to be open and able to digest all the good ideas we might come up with. We need to go through the regulate and relate before they can be open to the reasoning. And it's really hard. It really is difficult not to try and reassure, and we get that, and it is for everybody. It is such a gut feeling to try and reassure, but it is really just an encouragement to try acceptance and empathy and just stay with it, being with it. The slide we just talked about, the being with, try and be with the difficulty for a little bit before you're jumping to anything else.
And it might be that the reassure maybe comes a bit when you kind of feel you're able to get to the reason, but just as a go-to reaction, yeah, try that acceptance and empathy first.
Yeah.
This is a really hard one here, Charlotte.
Yeah, no problem solving. It is such a natural thing to try and do, but we need to meet our child where they're at. If they're here and we're there, they're not going to be able to take in all our great ideas. So we need to try and meet them where they're at before we come up with solutions to their difficulty.
And often, yeah, you attempt to problem solve early on, and if it just won't go so well, because really when that moment they're just saying, I want you to hear my emotion and let me feel that emotion.
Yeah, so don't silver line. Again, it's very, very easy to want to do because we want to make our child. It's really hard seeing our child being unhappy and seeing our child suffering, and we want to make it better. However, the way to do it is not to silver line straight away. It is to go through the regulate and relate first, and then we can start seeing the different sides of it, like some positive things. Yeah, and actually, as you were saying earlier, Matt, the more we are able to create that kind of safety and with our child, and when they're regulated, actually often we often find that then they easily come away from feeling that difficult experience that they are having. So even though it feels a bit counterintuitive, it often does work like that. And then most importantly, all emotions are okay. As you were saying earlier, Matt, that doesn't mean all actions are okay. It's not okay to hurt someone or hurt or ruin things, but all feelings, thoughts, desires, wishes, all these kind of things, the more they get a feeling that that's acceptable, there's just different ways you can show them, then the more they're going to feel that they can share things with you. And when your child share things with you, as you know, then you can together try and work it out, which is much easier than the child having to work it out all on their own.
And that brings us to the end. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. And we've got one final video that will be with you shortly, where I think a bit more about kind of the practical things in terms of returning to school.